You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansell. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Product Coalition. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Ali Hafizji. I'm really interested in today's session because Ali and I are going to be talking about this relationship between engineers and product. Now, before I give Ali the mic, I first of all want to introduce Ali because from what I've learned, he's a builder at heart with a rare mix of deep engineering chops and a true commercial focus. Ali's led product engineering that serves billions of interactions a month, and he's turned that into a repeatable way of working. At Wednesday, where Ali's CEO, Ali's built Vibe Sprints, outcome build model that puts skin in the game and prioritizes moving the business needle over just shipping those tickets. Ali also runs Tuesday, a premium web development and design studio and a certified Webflow enterprise partner. He leads marketing, sales, and strategy there, helping global brands automate and ship faster. Now, Ali's no stranger to shipping products that matter. He co-founded Bond, a micro-lending platform trusted by Uber, Swiggy, and Dunzo with over 800,000 microcredit transactions to gig workers. And earlier in his career, he shipped iOS books that helped thousands of developers level up. Ali also hosts the Wednesday show, where he learns from founders about building digital businesses. So he absolutely lives and breathes the craft from both sides of the microphone. Today's session is what engineers wish PMs knew. So you can expect a straight talk on aligning engineering with product strategy, building teams around outcomes, and how PMs can think more like owners than order takers. Ali's raised capital, built from zero, seen a venture through to acquisition, so he knows the cost of getting all of that wrong and the upside when you absolutely nail it. Ali, welcome to the show. Really excited to today's session.
Having me, Jay. I think you make me sound much larger than I am.
Not at all, not at all. And I'm excited, Ali, to bring in this conversation, not just a conversation around engineers, but that commercial focus that I know is at the heart of what you do as well. Can I get into it though, Ali? Is today's topic what engineers wish PMs knew? Why is this something passionate for you to stand up and have a conversation about?
I think the conversation that everybody is talking about is how can you get an outcome, and if you're not able to answer this question as to what the relationship between an engineer and product manager should be, what one should expect from one another, you can never get to a conversation about getting outcomes. And outcomes are the only way in which a digital business is going to move ahead. So, for example, if you consider any digital business, there are multiple stages in which the end user interacts with that particular offering. It could be, the awareness stage, acquisition, sign up, referral, engagement, retention. Each of these stages that the user interacts with that particular product, there are metrics that you can measure how that is doing. And if you need to change a metric, for example, if you need to change the number of users who are visiting the website to the number who actually sign up, that is a business metric. And if you need to change that, that's when you're saying that, hey, I need to get a business outcome. And then when you start drilling down, you'll ultimately end up with answering the question as to what is the relationship between an engineer and a product manager, and how should they communicate with one another? Because if you get that right, then your entire team will start talking about business metrics, which will actually move something for you.
Nice. Well, those relationships, the integrity of them is all built around trust. Where do you recommend product managers and engineers leaning into when they're first meeting each other to build on that trust?
So I think to answer there's no, it's very difficult to answer this question without really identifying the stage of the business. So for example, if it's a young business, if it's a startup pre-PMF, well, the best thing for you to do is be an extremely lean team, which means, the communication overhead is anyway small, and be completely transparent with your team. And then that automatically is a language of outcomes. So for example, if I'm the founder, I am an engineering team. In most cases, pre-PMF, the founder is the PM. They're not really hiring a product manager to do that because you still haven't really found out if there is like value in what you're providing. So if you maintain transparency, if you talk about like what you want to achieve, etc., you're anyways speaking in the language of outcomes. This problem becomes bigger, or it becomes more real when things start to scale. So when you have PMF, that's when things scale. So basically, to answer your question, I think it's a structural problem. The question is, the first time a product manager and engineer meet, what is the context in which they meet? Are they introduced to one another in a chaotic system? Are they introduced to one another in a system which has got some kind of idea in terms of how to manage and do things? My answer is that if you are a post-PMF company, if you found PMF, and if you are from the management, you need to start by creating just one pod. So what is a pod, and how do you structure these organizational units? I really like what the Amazon philosophy around it is. It says that, the size of a team needs to be small enough that it can be fed by just 2 pizzas. If you sort of dive deeper into that, what they're basically trying to say is that you need to have a team that is independent, that they can, have a meal together, but they're not really, they need to have everything within that team. So it needs to be cross-functional. You need to have designers, developers, analysts, product managers, everything in one team. And they need to be managing one part of your application, which has its own, for example, KPIs and metrics and ways to measure if it's moving in the right direction. So organizationally, what you need to do, if you haven't done this so far, is start by creating one small pod that probably just manages something that is important to you in that stage. Maybe it's signups, maybe it's referrals, maybe it's engagement, or maybe it's making sure that there is a retention. If you do that, it will force you to create a tech stack that is decoupled. It forces you to probably create a modular microservices architecture. It has its pros and cons. But if you introduce an engineer or a product manager in a pod setup, it's very easy for them to ramp up. The engineer will be able to understand what they need to do fairly quickly because the boundaries or the surface area that they need to touch is very well defined. Also, what success looks for that person is very well defined. The KPIs in terms of, hey, if engagement increases by 10%, which is what we are trying to achieve, is met, then we are successful. We have actually achieved something. So all of these things become much more easier. So I think what really matters is what sets the tone right is the organization structure. If the organization structure is set up to be in pods that are small enough, well-defined, they have their boundaries set, the tech stack is also structured in a way that it allows for this. And the management has to actually trust them. You need to trust that they will take independent decisions and they will, and you just need to make sure that you participate in setting those KPIs and metrics to track. I think if that happens, the interaction between the product manager and the engineer is usually very easy. Each one knows what they need to achieve. Each one knows what is the surface area that they touch, and things generally go well. But if it's not and it's chaotic, then it is typically chaos.
Nice. Thanks for that, Ali. Can I ask what's changed over time when it comes to the actual relationship? So assuming that there's known understandings on the outcomes, the metrics, what the company's here for, personalities are personalities and they don't always get along. You spoke about the 2-piece team, which back in the day before so much remote work, you could actually do that. But now in this remote world, what types of tactics and approaches and non-work-based things are you doing to build the bonds between engineering and product managers that you think, cuts through in a genuine way for both team members?
I think there is a language that one needs to understand and adopt. So I think as a product manager, I've seen one of two things. Either they are extremely abstract or they are extremely concrete. It's one of the two. But you need to find some middle ground. So for example, instead of saying we need to build a delightful onboarding experience, which is extremely abstract, you have no idea what that means. If you think about if a project manager or if a product manager says that, the engineer is probably hearing, what the hell does that mean? What am I supposed to build? What do you expect out of me? What do you mean by a delightful onboarding experience? So you probably need to translate that and create a sort of communication language that is understood to both. And I'm of the firm opinion that you need to start by framing the problem correctly. So for example, product managers need to learn how to frame the problem. So for example, it could be something like, I keep talking about onboarding, but it could be anything else. But it could be something like, we need to increase the percentage of signups to paid by 10%. This is a very it's very easy to understand this problem statement, and it's framed correctly. It's something that the engineer can understand, saying, okay, this is what they mean by, a delightful onboarding experience. I also think that a lot of other things can change between the way that a product manager and an engineer communicate. I think you need, like I found this happen a lot. We need to identify. We need to understand that timelines are not sort of written in stone. So product managers need to stop asking, when will this get done? Because when you keep doing that, you sort of keep micromanaging, and then the engineers' estimates are never concrete. They'll always give you something, way ahead in the future. I think you need to include them in the problem. You need to include them saying, number one, you need to stop giving the solution. I found that happen a lot. Many a times product managers, instead of explaining the problem, they'll actually give down the whole solution, saying, do this, which makes no sense. You should tell them the problem, and you should actually brainstorm with them as to what the solution could be. And I truly believe that many a times when you ask a question saying that, is there a better way to do this? Engineers actually will surprise you, because I've been on both sides of this equation, right? I've actually played the role of being an engineer, and I've actually played the role of being a product manager. If you explain the problem to an engineer and ask them, is there a better way to do it? You will be surprised by the number of solutions that they come up with, and they'll actually be able to do it in a much faster a way, which helps you validate whether that solution makes sense in the first place. I think product managers can also write much better specs. Talk about the problem, define the metric, create the user persona. If you've got any research that you've done, share it with your engineers. Explain the why. Stop talking about the how, when, what. Don't do that. Talk about the why. Explain your whatever data you have. I also think that you can include them in user discovery calls. That helps build a language of outcomes. I think in terms of async communication, Slack or any other, whatever else you're using, make sure that your language is verbose. Understand the context. Don't give solutions without identifying what is happening. Yeah, I think provide as much information as possible. Keep explaining the why. I think that should be that typically builds a good relationship. Another thing that I think is very, very interesting here is I think product managers need to have a lot of empathy for engineers. So once in a while, it might be good to actually ask them, saying, okay, what's the tech debt looking like? Is there something that I can do to help you? prioritize something over there. And just by having that conversation, you will have a much more cohesive team.
Nice. I'm going to bring the conversation back, Ali, to requirements as an item in the process. And by the way, I absolutely love what you said there about bring your engineers through the discovery side of it before you go into the solutioning world of delivery. But we've got this middle world, which is when we're writing requirements, we're producing our product requirements document. The first question is, at that point in time, when should product managers, you think, stop writing and start whiteboarding and being creative? Is that early on when it's coming into delivery, somewhere in between? And how do you think that is? How do you think product requirement documents should be brought to engineering teams? Is it a send and forget? Is it actually a workshop all around it, so there's time put aside to actually share some of the background story, some of the user discovery moments that may have happened that the engineers weren't able to see? How do you think engagement looks like in best practice?
So I have a very contrarian view on this, and I think that the practice of writing a PRD has been drastically affected by AI. So I still know that a lot of people do it, but I think that there is something fundamentally wrong here. The only reason why you write a product requirement document is you are identifying what requirements need to be there in terms of features, which eventually get built. You collect some data and see what worked. So it typically starts with 50% data. Sometimes it depends on like the stage of the business. Many a times you have a lot of information, you know what to do. Maybe you know, like, I think 70%, this is what will give us user pull. And sometimes you just don't know. You are starting with a hypothesis. I think that a product requirement document in today's day and age can be completely replaced with the prototype that the product manager builds themselves. And I'm of the very strong opinion that I also think that product managers need to stop doing roadmaps. That's not their job. But we can talk about that later. I think that a PRD now needs to be a working prototype that a product manager can actually go and validate themselves. And basically, whatever assumption that they're working on, many times when you read a product PRD, there are a lot of assumptions that they write. I've written them. You can actually validate that yourself and include your engineering and design team post you have run your validation. So you can actually show them data. You can show them what worked, what didn't work, what all have you tried, and then again tie them back to the core problem that you're trying to solve, which is whatever, let's say increase engagement by X or reduce drop-offs by Y. When they see that data and they see what all you have done, they will be able to take it to the finish line. But you will have to, what advantage you have by following this method is that the number of iterations that you do will be lesser because you have done a lot of the validation yourself.
Nice. I like what you said about the prototype concept there. For me, all of that, Ali, is about better storytelling, and a lot of product management, I think, is significantly, when it comes down to communication, and effective communication is best done through storytelling. But to your point, tell the story for the purposes of engineers. Don't tell that same story as if you're talking to the CEO. Adjust your storytelling and have empathy for a different set of listeners there. Can I ask, Ali, when it comes from coming back to the idea of prompt to prototype, what new risks does that as a workflow introduced? As that is a only sort of 2-3 year old way of working, is prompt to prototype, sit down in front of engineers. So what new risks come that product managers need to look out for because they're no longer producing PRDs. They're now using the prompt to prototype technique.
I'd love to get your views on this as well, but I don't think it's that widely used. I know that there are certain big companies who are talking about it. I know that at least that's what I've seen on X. Even like, for example, people at Figma and Google have started to completely drop PRDs and started a prototype. But I don't think it's that widely used yet. I think that one of the key things that I see is that people, at least product managers, lose patience. So for example, if you have a product or if you're working in a SaaS company with active customers, you've got something live, I mean, you're naturally going to accumulate some of the other tech debt. You made the best decision when you built that product at that point in time, and technology changes almost every day now. And in comes, let's say, a product manager who's just building things, in 2 days, and he has no empathy for the time that it takes for the engineering team to, let's say, bring these validated changes live in the app, because they are actually working with the baggage of decisions that have been taken, let's say, 5 years ago. But he's just been doing this for a week. So I think people lose patience when they do that. And when they lose patience, then I think it leads to a lot of other problems.
Okay, which often comes back to communication. The loss of patience is because communication lines aren't effective. Staying in that world, then, Ali, we've spoken a little bit around artifacts, whether it's PRDs, prototypes, etc. What ceremonies do you see in 2025 are critical for the PM engineer relationship?
Interesting. So I think it really differs from team to team, right? Like some teams prefer to meet once every 2 weeks. Some teams over communicate. I'm of the strong opinion that one needs to over communicate. What I generally like in terms of a ritual, I think rituals bring a lot of alignment. I think they also keep people accountable because they know that this is going to happen, and everybody's going to have something. So should I. So I think a weekly sort of a trio meet, maybe that's what you would call it, where you have, let's say, the product manager, the lead designer, and the tech lead meeting, and talking about how things are going within the sprint. They could also section some time off to talk about just practices in terms of, we are doing this way. And it leads to a lot of empathy in terms of understanding timelines. I also think that having a monthly roadmap review is very, very important. And that roadmap, I don't think that product managers should build a year-long roadmap, by the way, but at least having a roadmap which is 2 months out or 3 months out is okay. For an established business, if you're a young company, you pretty much don't know what to do, so you have a roadmap for a day, which is fine, because you just don't know what will work. So I think monthly roadmap review meetings work, and I think every time there is a launch, having a retro is extremely important. What worked, what didn't work. That helps.
Okay. And can I ask, when it comes to what the product managers are bringing in to those ceremonies, how much from the business and commercial side of the business do you think engineers want to hear about? Is it everything, the challenges of what the company's struggling with, maybe upstream, product marketing challenges, filling up the pipeline from sales? Should the product managers be bringing the full story into some of these ceremonies, or keep it around the engineering and technical side of the craft?
I think it needs to be about the product engineering side of the craft rather than the technical side or the product side of it or the business side of it. I'm a strong proponent of keeping things transparent and telling people the way things are, but that doesn't mean that you need to just go out and say it to them on a daily basis. I think the communication or the focus needs to be around the objectives that we are trying to achieve and the business outcomes that we are trying to bring, or the business or the changes to these metrics that we're trying to bring. And then everything else that you talk about needs to be about how are we going to do it, you know, what is the time that it's going to take, what are we going to prioritize together. And I think those types of dialogues are very healthy. So I would say don't hide anything, but you don't have to like go out and say it. You can have a one-on-one with them, different. It's a separate conversation. Doesn't need to happen with the whole team. But yeah, you can. I'm a big proponent of keeping things transparent.
Nice. Well, part of transparency, we spoke earlier around product metrics, ensuring they're out there, it's clear, KPIs, performance of the product, etc. But can I ask, how do you think we should be measuring the performance of engineering teams, and what metrics should be wrapped around that can be celebrated?
So I think that the idea of quality in engineering practices is extremely weird. Some people talk about quality as this abstract thing. People talk about, I don't know, coding principles, modularity, but all of these things are not measurable. People talk about good code, bad code. They're not measurable. I think the only thing that's measurable are DORA metrics, which is the only way to actually measure the quality of your software development lifecycle. And in a nutshell, what these metrics talk about is what are the number of bugs that are cropping up sprint on sprint, or release on release. What are the number of releases that you're doing? You want the bugs to be as less as possible, the releases to be as much as possible, as high as possible. What is the time that it takes for you to get a feature into production? Many a times you find that, this time is like super high. Maybe there's a long time that it takes to get approvals, design. It spends like an insane amount of time in testing. You want this time to be as small as possible. And I think that is another metric that they measure on regressions. I'm not quite sure, I don't quite remember. But I think these are, if you actually go down to the basics, these are the metrics that actually make the most sense. It's just the number of bugs, the number of releases, the time to market in terms of taking a feature live. It can also be the other way around, the time to roll back. These are the measures of quality for engineering. There's nothing else.
No, you spoke earlier around bringing the engineers into and encourage that divergent thinking around solutions.
Yeah.
For some engineers, that may be new. There's a new PM who's coming in and encouraging that, and the last PM wasn't that way at all. How do you think product managers should be helping engineers to think more entrepreneurially in ways like you spoke about earlier, and align with those business goals?
Yeah, I think ceremonies help a lot over here. If you have ceremonies in place where you're openly talking about, here's what we are trying to achieve. This is the business outcome that we want to bring in, or this is the metric that we are trying to change. It does take some time for people to stop thinking about the tasks that I need to accomplish, or I need to write X number of test cases, or I need to write these many UI or React components or something like that, to start thinking about, I'm actually doing this so that this metric is achieved. And when they start doing that, then they'll find better and faster ways to actually implement that. And they might come back to you with a better way to do it. So I think it does take time, especially for someone who's never done it before, but you'll be surprised. I mean, I think engineers pick it up very, very quickly. Nobody likes to be told exactly what to do. And if you think about it, engineers are extremely overqualified to be given tasks. And the truth is they don't like it.
Nice. Can I then take you to another spot, which is all, again, back to transparency. When and how do you think it's a great conversation for PMs and engineers to talk about this is going to hurt us later, whatever this may be. Spoken a few times about tech debt, but tech debt naturally exists in every piece of software out there. There's always something that we know can be improved. But what does a good hygienic conversation look like? Firstly, to raise the fact of we could be or should be creating some tech debt here. And secondly, how and when to address that debt.
I think, again, you're right. It's completely about communication. I think product managers need to talk to, maybe they need to have a conversation with their with the tech team and ask them saying, what would you do if you were the product manager? Many a times there's a lot of friction between both parties because the product manager is saying that we need to bring this change, or we need to build this, whatever that this is, so that this business metric changes. But there might be a lot of pushback from that tech team saying that to make this change, I need to actually first do ABC, which means your timeline is going to move. And that's just the right way to do it, technically speaking, because otherwise I'll have to do a lot of rework later, whatever. And it's very interesting what happens when a product manager approaches with a lot of empathy and says that, I understand that this is where you are. What would you do if you were the product manager? And that helps. The engineer stops thinking about what's important to him and starts thinking about what is right for the business. Because the truth is, the user doesn't care how you write your code. And once you lose that user, you have lost that user. He's not coming back. And that's what we're here to do, right? We're all here to build experiences for users that they enjoy.
Nice. I'm gonna try and collect some of your thoughts from throughout the session here in a scenario for you, Ali. You walk into a room, you've got a fantastic group of engineers, a product manager, a designer. It's day one for everyone. Ali's walking into the room. How do you set some expectations around what are going to be the first principles of how we all work together? Where would you start that conversation?
I've been that person many a times, and I've always approached it with first identifying what everyone's strengths are. If there are great engineers in the room, like, you have to start by identifying what they're really good at, and first tell them good things about that. It's the same for design, same for product management, same for any other person that's in your team. Start by identifying what their strengths are and compliment them on that, saying that they're doing a freaking amazing job owning that skill. And slowly learn to move the conversation around how that skill is actually helping the business. Then move one step further. And this can be done even in multiple meetings. You don't need to do it in one, because at the end of the day, you also need to work with these people for a long period of time. You can build a rapport. And then you sort of start identifying what helping the business actually means. And then you start drilling down into the idea of the metrics that actually help this business. And if you do that, even over 3 sessions or 4 sessions, everybody starts speaking the same vocabulary.
Nice. I'm gonna try and find a story from you, maybe at the opposite end of all of that, Ali. I introduced you at the start of the show. Plenty of experience on both sides of many different tables. Can you share what's a war story from your experience, Ali, where engineering and product alignment either created an incredibly fantastic outcome that no one's really experienced, or actually broke a product and broke a business?
I'll start with the second one first, because I think that's easier. Because, as Wednesday, like, we are a services provider, we typically get in when things aren't working. We typically start at that point where, let's say, a founder or somebody or a VC would get us externally saying that, please help these guys figure this thing out. I think it all starts with trust and communication. I mean, you have to understand that if you are a product manager, you are owning product, but you are also a manager. That means you need to have people skills, you need to have interpersonal skills, you need to have all of those things to be able to do a good job at this. So we've seen scenarios where, there is such little trust between the engineering and the product side that it leads to a complete standstill where each person blames the other. But in reality, nothing is really happening apart from just the blame. And the conversation moves from actually, I mean, I think the entire role of this product engineering unit is to really chase truth, right? Like that's what you're trying to do. You are trying to identify attributes or desires of your end user that you can convert into a digital offering so that they are met. And the more you do that, the more you are closer to identifying this truth on how to do that. And how do you help them achieve their desires? You will win. But if the conversation is mostly about blame, there's no conversation about identifying these things. So we've seen a lot of scenarios like that, nobody trusting each other, a lot of blame. There's typically a standstill. How do you turn this around? I think you really need to get like a super experienced product manager that is empathetic and really knows their craft. I think that can really make a very big difference. And I think that's also true for the technical leadership that is in place and for management, by the way. If management doesn't trust and they want to micromanage and own everything and, so by the way, like it's interesting to note, right? Like if you have a pod structure, you have to actually trust that pod as management to be able to make decisions, and those decisions could be wrong, but you have to be okay with it, right? So I think it's trust on all sides, because ultimately what you're doing is you're creating in a pod, you're creating an independent sort of entity that makes its own decisions, that actually implements those decisions, that learns from its actions, etc. And you have to be okay with that. You have to just sort of govern in a way. I mean, you could think of a product manager as a CEO of that particular unit. So I think it's trust all around. And the success stories I've seen are people who have more than just skill. They're extremely good at what they do, but they also have this higher order thinking in terms of, how do we do this together collectively? And I also find that these people are extremely growth minded. They are challenged by solving really tough and abstract problems. Early in my career, I spent like 8 years programming. And there was a point at which I realized that I just wanted to solve something that is much more tougher. I wanted to go after like abstract problems, which is what you mentioned during the time that I was running Bond, where I was really excited about solving problems like how do I get my first 10,000 users? If you think about it, it's extremely difficult to do. And most people who actually run extremely successful pods are people who are also very growth minded. So I think if you look for these attributes and find that in the right people, you typically have a winning recipe. Very tough to do, but at least you know what to look for.
Nice. I'm keen to finish up the episode really with sort of the start of your career, Ali, and that's a mentorship moment. For those that are maybe entering into engineering roles for the first time in their career, they've won that first job, they're going into an engineering team. What would be some advice from someone as experienced as you for them to have a think about when they turn up on the job day one? And what advice would you like them to sort of remember maybe for their first 30 days as an engineer?
Engineering is not programming. And the more you think about this statement, which is my job is not writing code, the more you will be successful, especially in the age of AI.
Nice. And what about relationships with other people, the importance of stakeholders, etc. Some of the other points beyond the craft of behind the computer that you mentioned?
I think it's very like if engineers think about this one statement that I said, right, that programming is not what you need to do. Um, Everything else that you said, which is stakeholder management, building relationships, finding truth, understanding why users are doing whatever they're doing, why does this business survive, and why are people paying this business money? They will start to ask these questions and uncover the answers themselves and learn how to fit into this ecosystem as a valuable organism.
Nice, nice. Well, I appreciate the final moment of mentorship in today's session. Ali, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you sharing some of your experiences, your practices, and your thoughts and leadership, styles and mechanisms you've collected over the years. So thank you so much for joining me on today's show. Thank you. Thank you for you, the audience, for listening in as well. If you'd like to learn more about Product Coalition, you can do so over at productcoalition.com. Until next time, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansell. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.